We should be recording the meeting.
I can't see it actually.
Oh, that's fine. I'll share my screen and then you can tell me when to shimmy over onto the next slide.
That's fine. We'll do it that way. That's good. Yeah.
Fab. Okay, can everyone see that?
Yep. Okay, so should we go? Should we move on? Okay, so I think I've gone past all of this sort of. Hang on, it's gone. Hang on, no, go back. Go back. Okay, so yeah, just very quickly agenda. So as I said, I'm very much going to get to the commercial point as quickly as possible. The way I've looked at this is to make it sort of kind of manageable is I'm looking at 3 key areas which are important to consider. So there's lots and lots of detail within the law. We're not going to look at that. We're going to look at as what are the critical things to consider when working with personal level data. Thanks, Lorna. So first of all, so what's all the fuss? What is all the fuss? The reason that there is, I think there is often quite a lot of confusion about what is personally identifiable information. The law GDPR, there are actually 2 laws which affect the use of data and data for marketing. Everybody talks about the GDPR. We're all used to that. But there's also another law, Pekka, Privacy and Electronic Communication, which has actually been in existence since 2013. Now, this is significant when you're doing email and SMS marketing, which I imagine all of you are doing. It tends to get kind of not forgotten as such, but not talked about as much. And it's really important to understand it because it overrules, the rules within Pekka overrule, in certain cases, the GDPR rule. And that's kind of where sometimes there's confusion. When I said earlier, things can be a bit grey, and you'll see as we go through this presentation, it's almost like the 2 laws. Sometimes they don't contradict each other, but they don't always match up. And this is what leaves businesses at risk sometimes. So what is PII data? Now that in the middle, that statement is directly from the ICO's guidelines around GDPR. And on the right, I've cited, again, directly from their guidelines, what they consider PII. So they consider it's not, we all tend to think of name and address and maybe telephone number, maybe email, but it is all those other things. Now, this may not be relevant to your day job, but the point is that these things matter. These things, it's just good to be conscious that there are different things that could be considered PII. So if you're working with personal level data and you think, oh, I don't have to worry about if I send the data, when I'm doing some maybe website marketing or maybe doing some other kind of digital or social marketing, oh, I can use their IP address to contact them to access them. Actually, you have to still apply GDPR within that. So just some thoughts really. Next. So some things to know before we kind of get into the nitty gritty. You may or may not know this. The fines at the moment. Actually, I'm going to caveat this with the fact that I don't know. This recently just come into the news. I haven't put it in here because it's it's kind of hot off the press. Is that the government is actually talking about removing GDPR. This is very kind of, but don't change what you're doing for now. There's just flutterings of conversation about that because GDPR is actually restrictive to business in certain areas. So, however, the current law states that if you get caught, in their opinion, for misusing data or a massive breach, then they have the right to fine your organisation up to 4% of their global revenue. Similarly, the second fine there, again, important to note when we come to talk about how do you apply GDPR, if you are unable to evidence that you are applying GDPR correctly as an organisation, you could get fined up to 2% of your global revenue. And they do that. you know, everyone thinks about, if I misuse the data, it's a problem. No, actually, if you don't have some of the policies they want you to have, they might get you that way. So they don't. It's pretty rare, but it's out there. The next point, children's code. Now, this is a new guideline from the ICO. So if anybody is working or collecting data of anybody who is under 18, which I don't know, in hospitality, if you may well be, as perhaps a bowling club, or perhaps you know, certain gaming sort of types of organizations, if you're collecting data, there is actually a new code, and there are stricter rules around how you hold and manage children's data. I won't go into the detail here, but just to say, there are 5 different levels depending on the age of the child, and they get stricter and stricter as the child gets younger, as you might imagine. The third point, are you a data controller, or are you a data processor, or are you both? I suspect you're all data controllers and you're all managing your own customer data, or you're all collecting your own customer data. So that makes you a controller. That makes you responsible for managing and looking after that customer data. If you pass your data on to anybody else, it could be an SMS broadcaster or an ESP, or even into a CRM, they are processing your data. They are a processor, and you need to have documentation in place with that distinction, and also any liabilities around use of data. So that's just, again, wording to be aware of. Now, do you need a data protection officer? Actually, possibly not. You only are actually legally required to if you are doing very large scale processing of PII data, like millions and billions, or you're a public authority. A lot of large organizations, financial companies, obviously they do, because they are very, very cautious about data. But the actual law states that those are the only 2 areas that you need to consider it. However, you must register at the ICO if you hold customer data. And data protection has to be a responsibility, a known responsibility in your organization at the highest level, at a board level. So next, requirement number 1, let's look at consent. Now, everybody, consent is always the biggest question we ever get asked. Is my data consented right? What can I do with my data? Am I collecting it right? Am I processing it correctly? Those sorts of questions. All of those questions are answered based upon, do you hold your data within the correct legal basis? There are 6. This again comes from the law. This is actually the law, is that there are 6 different legal bases of processing. Now, the 3 that are in yellow there are the ones that are likely to relate to your organization. Organizations, do you collect your data with actual consent, like an opt-in? When you're processing customer orders, you are doing that under the assumption that you're providing a service, and therefore you have a contract with them, and you have the right to manage that data in order to provide that service. And the third yellow one, legitimate interest, do you as an organization have the right to manage that data in order to legitimately run your organization? That could be that can also bring in area of confusion. The other 3 basically relate to, is it health data, your hospital or the police or a government organization, which is not a commercial enterprise. So the 2 areas where you're working with PII data in marketing is either the existing customers or prospect customers. Now, obviously, the way that you collect the data is the way that you can use the data effectively. So your ability to use your data for marketing starts right at the point you collect it. So one of the things that particularly around email and online marketing is that a lot of people think that they need to have opt-in. And I'm going to come into this in a little bit more detail, but actually you can apply something called the soft opt-in. I'm going to talk more about this in the next slide. So you don't have to ask opt-in to somebody who has bought your product. You will have the right to communicate to them without opt-in. For direct marketing and telemarketing, this is more GDPR. So, I was talking about GDPR and Pekka. This is the difference between them. Pekka relates to online marketing, essentially, and GDPR relates to offline marketing, if you want to make that simple distinction. It's not quite that simple, but essentially that's what it is. Direct marketing and telemarketing, you do not need consent as long as you offer an opt-out. Email and SMS marketing, you can have the soft opt-in. The thing for everything is that you must offer an unsubscribe and opt-out in every single communication you make with those individuals. Prospect data, on the other hand, you do have to have opt-in. You don't have a right to speak to somebody who hasn't previously bought your product without an opt-in. And again, direct marketing, you can apply the opt-out. Now, obviously, that's quite difficult when you're collecting information. You don't necessarily want to go through lots and lots, like, do you want us to contact you by email, SMS, direct mail, website, social? So it does affect how you collect the data. So next, just a little bit more about Pekka, because this is important. It's an area where we really help people sometimes who have been maybe doing it in an uncertain way. On the right, the top of that, again, because the reason I take things directly from the ICO guidelines is I like to evidence what I pass on to people. And this is directly, again, the top on the right-hand side, the rules for electronic marketing are those 2 points. You have the right, you can read it for yourself, but essentially, you have 2 options for doing online marketing. They've either specifically consented to you via some form of opt-in, which could be a tick box or a specific a specific action is what they call it, as a specific action to say they want you to communicate to them. Or they are, as I said earlier, they're an existing customer who's bought or negotiated to buy a similar product. That's really important. If they're buying pizzas off you, you can't start to communicate to them about buying tables and chairs, for example. It has to be a similar type of product. And you gave them an opt-out at the point of collecting the data, you can communicate to them. Now, if you think this through, in red there, what that actually means in real terms is if you are asking them, if you are asking customers to opt in, perhaps if you're lucky, you're getting a 20% opt-in. I don't know your figures, but it depends. However, if you apply a soft opt-in data collection mechanism, maybe you get a 30% opt-out. But that means that other 70% is suddenly usable. That is suddenly, you can suddenly communicate to that other 70%. So you've gone from only having 20% of your customers you can communicate to a 70% of your customers. That's where the difference comes commercially. However, another point to make, if you have historically asked an opt-in mechanism, you can't retrospectively go back to that group and start to mail those people who didn't opt in. But if you change, so there'll become a point in time when you can change the mechanism that you do to collect their consent, and then going forward. And some of the case studies I'm going to show you show how that has helped organizations. I don't know if that makes sense. And this is the area that gets a bit confusing, to be honest. It can be confusing, because if you've done something in one way and then you change that way, that also has to flow down into the organization about logistically and technically, how can the organization work with the new way of collecting data. Okay, next. So here I've just put up some examples that kind of just highlight that a little bit. So obviously on the left, the account at the point of potential account setup, this is a prospect consent wording. You have to ask for opt-in if they are not an existing customer. However, once they become a customer, so the next box, the order completion underneath, the soft opt-in, once you've received an order from them, you can then switch, if you like, to an opt-out. And then that means that anybody who hasn't opted out, you will then have the right to communicate to. So they're just, I mean, they're very kind of simplified versions, examples. But that's just something to think about and see how is your organization doing it. Is it helping you maximize the volume of customers that you can communicate with? One thing I do think about, obviously, in the hospitality industry, if you're working with, how does that apply in reality to on-site data collection? So it could be, an example could be, sometimes perhaps if you offer to email them a receipt as opposed to provide a receipt. So this is just something to think about. How can you apply this in your live operation to increase the amount of customer data you can bring into your database? So if you were to do a receipt email, as long as at the point you say, you collect their email address and you say you're going to send the receipt, as long as you say, you give them the option to opt out at that point, say, then those records, and you have the mechanism within your systems to do that, then those people that don't opt out can be added to your CRM system for future marketing. Okay, requirement 2 and this requirement and the next requirement, there's a little bit of theory, but I'm going to skip through it because we want to get to the case studies. So as well as consent being a really important thing, how do you look after the data? Now, these are the actual principles that the GDPR is based upon. I'm going to skip down them because they're more for the technical people, but it's useful for you to understand this, because actually in your organization, is somebody in your organization worrying about this? Because again, this is an area that the ICO will, this is one of the areas the ICO is particularly will particularly focus on if they were to come and look at your organization. So firstly, lawfulness, fairness and transparency goes back to the consent piece. Is it clear about why you're collecting the information and what you're going to use it for? So in any wording you have that collects data, just be really clear. We're collecting it for a newsletter. We're going to collect it to market to you. We're going to, do research with your data, whatever it may be. Purpose limitation, you can only use it for however you ask them for the data, you can only use it for those purposes. So be really, maybe shouldn't I say this, maybe be quite vague or generic about your wording. That increases your ability to use it for a range of things. Data minimization, you cannot collect lots and lots and lots of information that is not relevant to the service that they are buying from you. You can't suddenly, you may wish to ask for their date of birth because you want to do a birthday mailing perhaps, but you can't ask them for, lots of other information which they would not see as relevant. Accuracy, you need to keep it up to date. That's about database management, making sure that it's accurate. Storage limitation, you should only keep it for as long as you need it. And that matters when you're deciding how big is your marketable file. Theoretically, in your industry, you probably, how long is a past customer considered a past customer? Is it 2 years? Probably isn't 10 years. What's that distinction? Integrity and confidentiality, data security. We all know about that. And accountability, to be able to justify all of the above. And that comes in the form of the next slide, Lorna. Don't want to frighten you, but there is a bunch of mandatory documentation that they ask for. I'm not going to go into it, but about half of those are mandatory. And if your organization doesn't have those and cannot evidence that you're looking after the data, they will get very cross. So is somebody in your business worrying about that? They probably ought to be. Okay, moving on. Looking after the data subject. So this is the other core component of the law. This is the last of the three. And this is just this slide, you'll be glad to know. The data subject, i.e. the consumer, has the right, all of these rights around their data. Indeed, you as a data subject, any customer file that you are on, is it, maybe John Lewis or Pizza Express, who knows, you have all of these rights about your data, and you as an organization have to be able to demonstrate that you can look after their data. So I'm not going to go into detail there, but just to know that the consumer has a lot of power over their own data. So be careful about how you look after it and how you communicate to them. Because I'll tell you what, the one thing, having been in this world for a long time, it only takes one person to criticize the way you're looking after their data and literally to take it to the ICO and or national media to seriously impact your organization. And I have seen it a number of times where one person can seriously, I mean, I actually was, I'll give you a little story here. I was actually called into the Houses of Parliament once, myself and two other data organisations, because an MP felt that he was being missent information when it turned out actually he wasn't. He didn't quite realise that he'd given us consent for to use his information, but he was literally going to take it to the floor of the Houses of Parliament to demand more rigorous rules around data. So, I mean, that's an extreme example, but I've been involved in many cases where people take it to the national newspapers and it has seriously altered the law and affected businesses. So just be aware that the data subject, the consumer, has a lot of power. Okay. So in summary, all of that basically means, do you think you're compliant now? Make sure that somebody is confident of the way that you're collecting the data and then how you're subsequently using it. Are you registered with the ICO? Highly recommend. It's only £35 and they really don't like it if you aren't and you're holding customer data. Somebody at board level should be caring about data protection. That's the expectation from the ICO. Something I haven't mentioned before is staff training. It comes out in our case studies, but have you been trained by organisation? Is there staff training by anybody who works with data? It is a mandatory requirement and actually really can benefit an organisation if people understand the law. Document. It's, you know, it's just sorry. And look after the customer. In a nutshell, that's the things to worry about. Okay, case studies. So I've got 3 case studies. These are real case studies that myself and our business have worked on. By the way, we work across market, so they're not all related to your market, but where possible, I've endeavoured to kind of document them in a way that will give you value. This one probably is. It is a UK pizza delivery company. We have worked with who they are. Historically, their situation was that they were post-COVID. They were very successful in COVID because we were all locked down, and their consented email pool was dropping dramatically post-COVID, naturally, because everybody else's restaurants and opened up again, and they you know, it was a natural course of events, but it got them thinking about what were they doing, and they were losing revenue compared to during COVID. The original status was they had a marketable file which was consented via opt-in. It was 12-month consent via opt-in. They had nearly 1.5 million at before it dropped, and it dropped within 6 months. They lost about a third of their file because of their opt-in approach. Because obviously, if you imagine you've got a 12-month window, people drop off after 12 months. So if you've got a customer who's 13 months, they're no longer on your marketable file. Because of the dramatic shift between COVID and non-COVID, they lost a third of their marketable file, and it was declining at about 100,000 a month. Obviously, massive revenue impact on that. So we reviewed that with them, and as I said, what they'd done historically with opt-in, they had to keep like that, but they changed their permission statement within their order processing online process to a soft opt-in. And within 3 months, they began to increase that marketable file again, even though the actual number of customers was kind of flattening out. They increased their marketable file. So the outcome was it gave them, and in that time frame, a 25% increase in the marketable file, and also they predicted that they were going to basically go above and beyond their original marketing file within the next few months. So that gave them, we don't know the revenue outcome, we didn't get that information, but it made us, you know, a material difference to the amount of people that they could market to. Okay, next. Case study 2. Now this is an interesting one. This is a little bit about, this is a bit of database stuff, it's a bit of GDPR stuff, and it's a bit of staff training stuff. So it kind of is all of those things really. But it was a very high-end luxury whiskey brand, very small volumes, but they also had what they were as a smaller organization. And we see this a lot in small organizations, is that different areas of the organization have responsible for maybe different channels. Like you might have somebody who is responsible for, you know, online web orders, and then somebody who is doing SMS marketing, and maybe somebody else is doing some offline marketing and collecting customer data. And as if if it's a sort of a siloed operation, is there a cohesive approach to collecting data and the message around collecting data? And you know, I wouldn't say we're surprised, because we see it quite often, but we often see in kind of small and medium-sized businesses, those areas don't necessarily talk to each other, or they don't have a cohesive approach. The other area here is that as a very highly personalized communications, there were also, if you like, some rogue salespeople who had one-to-one relationships with people, and didn't have any documentation about those customers and what their GDPR status. So there was a piece within the organization to build an SCV, as a single customer view, for them. But during that process is when we discovered that they might have the same customer in maybe all 3 different data assets in the organization, and different consent against all of them. So what we did once we built the process, if you like, was then manage back out into the organization some training about this consent piece, about how they needed to have a consistent approach to a soft opt-in approach. And they also used a newsletter approach, because for them it was all about kind of regular, you know, high quality, detailed communication. But it meant that the business was GDPR compliant, they could have confidence in that, but also they then had the ability to select the right data for the right campaigns. You know, this is, I suppose, as much as anything, is about bringing together across the organization what is the GDPR approach. There's that. So does everybody understand how they're collecting data, and then what they can do with it? And that's where training became really significant, because actually nobody in the organization really had a grip of it. So next one. An online male clothing retailer. They're purely online. They didn't have any stores. Their situation was they weren't, well, and they didn't realize this, but they weren't maximizing the volume of their marketable file. They were looking after their data well. They understood GDPR, and they'd had some previous advice, which was very good advice, was that, you know, you have to, the file that you make available, you have to justify how far, you know, what is an existing customer, what defines who is an existing or newly lapsed customer. And in their case, they believed that purchasing menswear was a very regular behavior. So if you purchased something in the last 6 months, you were classified as a customer. Anybody before that was that they actually removed. They were being very, very cautious. So what's happened is actually we looked at their EPOS data to understand what was the real behavior of their customers, and found out that over 50% of purchases occurred within a 6 to 12 month period. So having just the simple process of doing that and extending their marketable file by 6 months increased their to a 12 month. Anybody within a 12-month window was considered a customer, and therefore they could apply the soft opt-in to increase their marketing file by 70%. Again, we don't know the revenue outcome, but it clearly would have been beneficial to them. So that's that. So I mean, these are just examples of, I've tried to look at things that could be actionable for you into your business, where you could ask some questions that will give you access to more data to increase the efficiency of your marketing. You know, obviously it's all about revenue and increasing revenue. So that's me. Thank you. So I hope that's been useful. I've done it, and I'm sorry that I know there was some detail in there, there was some theory in there, but that's really just to set the baseline from how can you kind of confidently go back into your business and go, actually, are we doing this okay? Can we be more efficient? Can we extend our marketing file? And those are some of the considerations to have really around it. So that's me really. Open for any questions if anybody's got a question or would like any more information.
Oh, no, doesn't look like there are any questions.
No, well, I hope it was useful. I know it's GDPR, I can't help that, but I'm hoping it's potentially actionable. Hopefully GDPR is actionable, and that's the point. It's just that don't get, some people just get frightened by it. Oh my God, it's the law, I just don't want to think about it. But actually it really can help your business if you apply it right.
Thank you, Lisa. And obviously, if anyone does have any questions, anything, or give us a shout if you do want to chat about anything. All right. Thank you very much, everyone.
Okay.
Thank you, Lisa.
Thank you.
See you later.
All right.
Thank you.
Have a good day. Bye-bye.